The casserole was still warm in my hands when I heard my own daughter say through the kitchen door, "She doesn't need that much space at her age. It's selfish, honestly." I stood there in the hallway of her house in Westerville, holding the green bean dish I'd made the way her father used to like it, and I did not move. I have been told my whole life that I'm too quiet, that I let things slide. My late husband used to say I could sit through a tornado as long as nobody asked me how I felt about it. So I stood very still, the way I had learned to do, and I listened. "It's not about the space," my son-in-law said. "It's the money sitting in that account doing nothing. We could put it to work. The kids' college, the addition. She'd be living with us anyway." "Living with us?" my daughter repeated, and she laughed a little, the way you laugh when you're tired of an idea before it's even happened. "Mom in the basement. God." I want you to understand something before I go any further. I loved that girl from the second they put her on my chest in a hospital in 1979. I sat up with her through croup and chickenpox, and a boy named Brett who broke her heart in the 11th grade. I paid for half of a wedding I couldn't really afford because she wanted peonies in November, and peonies in November cost what they cost. I am not telling you this to make her the villain. I'm telling you because the worst betrayals in this life don't come from strangers. They come from the people you'd have given your last dollar to. The people who know exactly where you keep your heart because you handed them the map yourself. I knocked. I made myself knock, like a guest, in the house I'd helped them buy the down payment on. The talking stopped. My daughter opened the door with her company smile already on. "Mom, we didn't hear you come in." "I brought the green beans," I said. "You didn't have to do that." She took the dish like it was an inconvenience. "We have plenty." I sat through that Thanksgiving. I passed the rolls. I told my grandson his drawing of a turkey was the best I'd ever seen, and I meant it because that boy is the one bright thing I haven't lost yet. I laughed at my son-in-law's joke about the Browns, which is a joke that tells itself every year in Ohio. And the whole time I felt like I was watching myself from the ceiling. A small gray-haired woman in a borrowed chair, being measured for abasement. My name is Maeve, by the way. I'm 68 years old. I have been a widow for 3 years, 4 months, and some number of days I stopped counting because counting was making me sick. Let me back up because you can't understand a kitchen door without understanding the years that built it. I married my husband when I was 23. We met at a paper company in Akron where I did the books, and he ran a loading dock, and he had forearms like a man in an old cigarette ad, and absolutely no idea what to do with a checkbook. I balanced our accounts for 41 years. I clipped coupons before clipping coupons was a thing people made fun of. When the plant cut his hours in the 80s, I took a second job doing payroll for a dentist's office. And I never once let my daughter see me cry over a stack of bills, though Lord knows I did plenty of crying in the laundry room where the dryer covered the sound. We were never rich, but we were careful, and careful adds up. By the time my husband retired, we owned our house free and clear, and we had a little put away, not a fortune. Enough to be all right, if all right was something a person was allowed to be. Then he got sick. It was fast, which everyone says is a blessing, and I suppose it is compared to the alternative. But nobody tells you that fast feels like being robbed in broad daylight. One February he was shoveling the driveway and complaining about it, and by the next February I was sitting in a funeral home choosing between 2 shades of oak. The life insurance came through, and the house was paid off, and between that and what we'd saved and his pension and my Social Security, I was, for the first time in my whole life, a woman who did not have to lie awake doing math. I cannot tell you what that felt like. It felt like guilt, mostly. It felt like I'd been handed a prize for surviving the worst thing that ever happened to me. My daughter and her husband were wonderful at first. They had me over. They checked on me. My son-in-law fixed my gutters and wouldn't take a dime. And I thought, isn't that nice? Isn't that what family is? I see now it was a man checking the foundation of a house he intended to buy. It started small. It always does. First it was, "Mom, you don't need to keep all that in a savings account. You're losing money to inflation. Let me have my guy look at it." His guy. I should have heard the warning in those 2 words. But grief makes you stupid and lonely makes you grateful, and I was both. So I let his guy, a young man named Doug with very white teeth, move some of my money into things I didn't fully understand, with fees I didn't fully see, and every quarter I get a statement I couldn't read, and my son-in-law would say, "It's doing great, don't even worry about it." I worried about it. I'd worried about money my whole life, but I'd just learned not to say so out loud, because every time I did, my daughter would get that look, the patient look, the one you give a child who's afraid of the dark. "Mom, you have to learn to trust people," she'd say, as if trusting people had ever once paid my electric bill. Then it was the house. My house, the little ranch I downsized into after the funeral because the old place had too many rooms full of a man who wasn't coming back. "It's so much for you to keep up," my daughter started saying. "The yard, the taxes. What if you fell? What if I fell?" That's the phrase they use, you know, when they want to start talking about you like you're already gone. What if you fell? As if I hadn't fallen plenty in my life and gotten back up every single time without one of them holding the ladder. And finally, it was the addition. They wanted to build onto their house. A bigger kitchen, a bonus room, and, oh, by the way, a suite. A mother-in-law suite, they called it. And I remember thinking how strange it was that they had a name for the room before they had the room, and the name had me in it. "It would be perfect," my daughter said over coffee one Sunday. "You'd have your own space. You'd be right there for the kids. You wouldn't be all alone in that little place. And honestly, Mom, financially, it just makes sense. You sell the ranch, we use that, and a little of the savings for the build, and everybody wins." Everybody wins. I sat with my coffee going cold, and I did the math the way I always do, in my head automatically. And the math said, I sell my house and hand over my independence and a chunk of the money my husband died to leave me. And in exchange, I get a bedroom in someone else's house, where I will be expected to be grateful and quiet and available for childcare. And where, if I ever became inconvenient, I would have nowhere on God's earth to go. That's not a suite, that's a soft little cage with a name on the door. But I didn't say that. I said, let me think about it, because I was raised to be agreeable, and because part of me, the lonely part, the part that ate dinner alone every single night listening to a television I wasn't watching, part of me wanted to say yes so badly it frightened me. Imagine being so lonely that a cage looks like company. So when I stood in that hallway on Thanksgiving and heard the truth of it, heard Mom in the basement, God, heard my money described as sitting there doing nothing, something in me that had been asleep for 3 years woke up. It didn't wake up angry. Not yet. It woke up the way you wake up at 2 in the morning, sure you heard a sound downstairs, alert, listening, knowing in your bones that something is in the house that doesn't belong there. I drove home that night the back way, past the cemetery, which I usually avoid. I pulled over by the fence. I didn't get out. I just sat in the car with the heat running, and I talked to my husband out loud like a crazy woman, which I do sometimes, and which I'm not ashamed of anymore. "They want the money, Earl," I said. "Our money. They want to build a room and put me in it." And I swear to you I could hear exactly what he would have said in that flat, dry way he had. He would have said, "Then I guess they don't get it, that's all." He was never a man for speeches. "Then I guess they don't get it." I started to laugh, and then I started to cry. And then I drove home and I slept. For the first time in months, all the way through the night. The next morning I did something I had never done in my entire married or widowed life. I called a lawyer. Not their lawyer, not a family friend, not Doug with the teeth. I looked up an estate attorney 3 towns over, a woman named Pam I'd never met and I made an appointment, and when the receptionist asked what it was regarding, I said, "Getting my affairs in order," because that's a phrase that makes people stop asking questions. I won't bore you with everything that happened in that office, but I'll tell you the part that mattered. Pam, the attorney, was about my daughter's age, sharp and kind, with reading glasses on a chain. She had me lay it all out. The accounts Doug managed, the fees, the conversations about the house. And when I finished, she was quiet for a second, and then she asked me one question that I have thought about every day since. She said, "Maeve, when's the last time you spent money on something you wanted, just because you wanted it?" I opened my mouth to answer, and I couldn't. I sat there in that chair and I could not think of a single thing, not a vacation, not a dinner, not a dress. I had spent 45 years being careful and 3 years being grateful, and somewhere in all of it I had forgotten that the money was supposed to be mine, that it was the reward, not the bait, that my husband had worked a loading dock with his bad back into his 60s so that someday I could be a little reckless, and I had taken that gift and turned it into a thing to be guarded and apologized for, and slowly given away to people who described it as doing nothing. I started to cry in that office, and I am not a crier in front of strangers. Pam handed me a tissue without making a thing of it, and she said, "All right, let's figure out what you want, and then let's protect it." Here is what we did, and I'm telling you the specifics because I know some of you are sitting where I was sitting, and nobody tells us this. Nobody tells us the steps. We're just supposed to absorb it from the air. We pulled everything out of Doug's accounts. Yes, there were fees and a little tax to deal with. And yes, it stung. But Pam connected me with a fee-only advisor, a fiduciary, which is a word I didn't know at 68 and wish I'd known at 30. A fiduciary is just a person who is legally required to act in your interest and not their own commission. They exist. Ask for them by name. We set up a trust, with me in control of it for as long as I have my wits, and clear instructions for after. We did a will that said exactly what I wanted, and not what was convenient for anyone else. We did a power of attorney and the healthcare directive, and Pam explained, gently, that I should think very hard about who I named. Because the person who holds your power of attorney can do an awful lot, and it should be someone who would spend your last dollar keeping you comfortable, not someone who'd resent every dollar that didn't end up theirs. I named Pam's firm as a backstop, and I named my grandson, the one who drew the turkey, for when he's grown. And I did not name my daughter. I want to be honest with you about how that felt, because it would be easy to skip over. It felt like a small death. It felt like failing at the one job I'd had longest, which was being her mother. I sat in my car in the parking lot afterward, and I grieved it. But grief and clarity can live in the same body at the same time, I've learned. You can mourn someone and still keep your hand on your own wallet. For a few weeks, nothing happened. I went to my appointments and I came home and I didn't say a word. And then my daughter called all bright and breezy to circle back about the build. That's how she said it. Circle back. Like I was a work email. I asked them to come over. Just the two of them, I said. No kids. I made coffee in the good pot. The one my husband bought me one. Mother's Day, and I set out the cookies I'd made, because no matter what is happening in my life, I will not have people in my home without offering them something to eat. That's how I was raised, and it's too late to fix it. They sat on my couch, and my son-in-law had his folder. He actually brought a folder with the addition plans in it, and a printout of what they figured I could get for the ranch. He'd been on Zillow. He'd done comps. He laid it all out on my coffee table like he was selling me a timeshare, and the whole time my daughter watched my face for the moment I cave. I let him finish. I've found that's the kindest thing you can do sometimes. Just let a person finish the speech they've rehearsed, because then they can't say you didn't listen. When he was done, I picked up my coffee and I said, "I'm not selling the house, and I'm not putting any money into the addition." The room got very quiet. My daughter laughed first, the nervous laugh. "Mom, I think you're misunderstanding." "I'm not," I said. "I understand it just fine. I heard you, sweetheart. At Thanksgiving, in the kitchen, Mom in the basement." I have never seen the color leave a person's face the way it left hers. My son-in-law looked at his folder like it might tell him what to do. "I'm not angry," I said. And the strange thing was, I wasn't. Not anymore. I was. But I'm not now. I'm just done. I spent my whole life taking care of this family, and I'll keep loving you till the day I die, but I am not going to fund a room in your house and move into it so I can be useful to you. I'm going to be useful to me for a while. I think I've earned that." My daughter's voice got hard then, the way it does when she's scared and won't admit it. "So that's it? You'd rather sit alone in this house with all that money than help your own family?" And here's the thing I'd practiced, the thing Pam helped me see. I said, "It's not all that money, honey. It's not even that much money. But it's mine. Your father left it to me. Not to the addition, not to Doug's fees. To me. And the fact that you can only see it as a resource and not as the last thing your father ever gave me, that's the part that breaks my heart. Not the basement. That." My son-in-law had the decency to look ashamed. My daughter didn't. She stood up and said some things I won't repeat, about how I'd always been cold, how I'd always held back, how her father was the warm one and I was the one with the spreadsheets. And every word landed because there was a little truth in all of it, the way there always is in the cruel things people say when they're losing. I had been the one with the spreadsheets. Somebody had to be. The spreadsheets were how I loved them. They just never saw it as love because love that keeps the lights on doesn't feel like love. It feels like air. You only notice it when it's gone. They left. My son-in-law said, "Thank you for the coffee, Maeve," on his way out, which was more than my own daughter managed, and the door closed and I stood in my paid-off house in the quiet, and I waited to feel destroyed. I didn't. I felt like a window had been opened in a room that had been closed up for years. I'd like to tell you that they came around in a week, and we all cried and hugged. That's not what happened, and I won't lie to you, because I think you can tell when somebody's lying to make a story tidy. My daughter didn't speak to me for almost 5 months. 5 months! I missed my grandson's birthday because I wasn't invited. And I cried about that one for real, in the laundry room with the dryer going, just like the old days. But here is what I did with those 5 months, and this is the part I actually want you to hear, because the confrontation isn't the point. Any fool can slam a door. The point is what you build in the room once you've stopped apologizing for taking up space in it. I answered Pam's question. I figured out what I wanted. I started small, because that's how you learn to want things again after you've forgotten how. I bought myself a coat. A real one, wool, the color of a good red wine, the kind I'd have called too much my whole life. I wore it to the grocery store and a woman my age stopped me by the oranges and said, "That color is gorgeous on you." And I about cried right there in the produce section, because nobody had said anything nice to me that wasn't about being useful in 3 years. Then I did the thing I'd been afraid of. I joined things. I am not a joiner. I was the wife who waited in the car. But I'd read somewhere that loneliness in older folks does as much damage as smoking. And I thought, well, I've already lost my husband and most of my dignity. I might as well try not to lose my health too. I joined a walking group at the rec center. I signed up for a watercolor class at the library taught by a retired art teacher named Frank, who is 72 and has opinions about brushes and absolutely no patience, and who I will admit here to you strangers, I have come to look forward to seeing on Tuesdays more than I'd cared to say out loud. I painted terrible watercolors. Genuinely terrible. Frank told me my barn looked like a sad accident, and I laughed harder than I'd laughed in years because he was right, and because nobody had teased me like that since my husband died, and I hadn't known how much I missed being teased. Being teased means somebody isn't afraid of you. It means they don't think you'll break. After 3 years of people treating me like a fall risk, getting told my barn was a sad accident was the warmest thing imaginable. The walking group became friends. Real friends, women my age. A couple of widows and one fierce divorcee named Linda, who at 71 had just gotten her motorcycle license out of spite and dared anyone to say a word about it. These women had all been where I'd been, in their own ways. Linda told me about her own kids circling her late husband's pension like it was a kill on the savannah. Another woman, sweet and soft-spoken, told me she'd signed her house over to her son and now lived in fear of his wife's moods and couldn't undo it. And I went home and got down on my knees, which my knees do not love, and thanked God and Pam the attorney that I had not done the same. I took the trip. This is the big one. My husband and I always said we'd see the Grand Canyon, and we never did, because there was always a furnace that died or a kid who needed braces or a year that was tight. So I went, by myself at 68, with my red coat and a suitcase I bought just for the occasion. I stood at the South Rim in October, with the cold air coming up out of all that emptiness. And I cried, but they were the good kind this time, and I said, out loud, not caring who heard, "Well, Earl, we made it. I made it." And a young couple nearby smiled at me the way you smile at an old woman talking to the air, and I smiled right back, because let them wonder. Let them all wonder. I had earned the right to talk to my husband at the edge of the world. Now, the reconciliation, because there is one, though it's not the kind you'd put on a greeting card. It was my grandson who broke the ice, the way children do, because they don't know yet that adults have decided not to speak. He'd been told, I'm sure, some version of why Grandma wasn't around. But one day in the spring, he found my number in his mother's phone. That boy, 8 years old and smart as a whip. And he called me himself when she was in the shower. "Grandma," he said, "are you mad at us?" And I sat down on my kitchen floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. And I said, "No, baby, I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you." And he said, "Can you come to my game?" And I said yes before he finished the sentence. I went to that game. I sat on the metal bleachers in my red coat away from my daughter, who saw me and went stiff as a board. And I watched my grandson strike out twice and catch one fly ball, and you'd have thought he'd won the World Series the way I carried on. Afterward he ran to me first, before his own parents, and threw his arms around my waist, and over the top of his head I looked at my daughter, and she looked at me, and neither of us said anything, but something passed between us, not forgiveness yet, just a white flag. Just two tired women acknowledging that we'd both been bleeding for 5 months over money and pride. She called me that night. The conversation was awful and necessary and full of long silences. She cried. I cried. She said she didn't understand how it had gotten so far. I said I didn't either. She didn't apologize. Not really, not in the words, but she said, "I miss you, Mum." And from her, that's an apology. I've known that since she was 3 years old. We are careful with each other now, my daughter and I. It's not what it was. I'm not sure it should be. I think the version of us where I gave and they took and took was never as healthy as I told myself it was. What we have now is smaller and more honest. She doesn't ask me for money anymore, and I don't offer, and somehow we have more to say to each other than we did when money was the only language between us. My son-in-law, to his credit, sat me down one afternoon and apologized for the folder, for the comps for Doug. He's not a bad man. He's just a man who confused a balance sheet with a family, which is a mistake half the country makes. They built their addition, eventually with their own money and alone, the way people are supposed to. There's no suite in it. There's a guest room with a real bed, where I stay sometimes when I babysit, by choice, because I want to and not because I owe anybody anything. And when I leave, I get to go home, to my house. My paid-off, too big for one person, full of my own self-house, where my terrible watercolors hang in the hallway. and my red coat lives on the hook by the door. I'm 70 now. The walking group still walks. Linda still rides that motorcycle and has not killed herself yet, despite my predictions. Frank and I have graduated from Tuesday watercolors to Tuesday watercolors, followed by dinner, and I'll just let that sit there, because a woman my age is allowed her secrets and her surprises, and at 70, I have discovered I am still capable of both. I think about that kitchen door a lot. The one I stood behind on Thanksgiving holding the green beans, hearing myself described as a problem to be solved and an account to be drained. I used to think the worst thing that ever happened to me was losing my husband, and losing him was the worst grief. But standing behind that door was the worst betrayal, and the strange, hard, true thing I've learned is that the worst betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to the rest of my life, because it woke me up. It made me ask the question Pam asked. It made me reach for the red coat and the Grand Canyon and the terrible barn and the man who teases me about it. If you're sitting where I was sitting, and I know some of you are, I can feel it. I want to tell you the one thing nobody told me. The money your husband left you, the house you paid off, the small careful pile you built out of 40 years of clipped coupons and double shifts and crying in the laundry room, that is not sitting there doing nothing. That is your freedom in a savings account. That is your husband still taking care of you. That is your own self, made solid, and you do not owe it to anyone, not the addition, not the basement, not even the people you'd have died for and would still in a heartbeat die for. Love them. Lord, love them with your whole heart, but keep your name on the door. I keep my husband's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. The other night, after dinner with Frank, I stood at my own kitchen sink in my own house, and I caught my reflection in the dark window. An old woman with a wine-red coat on the hook behind her and a chain at her throat, and I didn't see a fall risk or a problem to be solved or somebody's mother to be managed. I saw Maeve, just Maeve, still here, still careful, still mine. And I said to the woman in the glass, the way I used to say it to my husband, well, we made it. I turned off the light, and I went to bed in the room that nobody gets to put a name on but me. For 3 years, I thought my softness was a kindness, and it took standing behind a kitchen door to understand it had become a kind of slow surrender. I had handed my daughter the map to my heart, and then acted surprised when she walked straight to the vault. But nothing in this story happened by accident. The folder full of Zillow printouts, the mother-in-law suite with my name on it before the walls even existed, the money described as doing nothing, none of that came out of nowhere. It grew season after season because every time I felt that twist in my stomach, I swallowed it and poured the coffee and said, "Let me think about it." I taught them with my silence that my no wasn't real. People will always take exactly as much as you let them, and they will call it love right up until you stop. What turned it around wasn't anger. Anger is easy and it burns out by morning. What saved me was the harder, quieter work of doing the right thing by myself for once, of looking at Earl's careful, coupon-clicked money, and finally treating it as the gift he meant it to be, instead of a thing I had to apologize for owning. That was the moral spine a bit, the part where I stopped confusing being agreeable with being good. But character alone wasn't enough. I also had to get smart and fast at 68. I had to learn what a fiduciary was. I had to learn that the man with the white teeth and the quarterly statements I couldn't read was costing me my freedom in fees. Pam taught me that you cannot protect what you refuse to understand, and that the most loving thing an older woman can do is read the paperwork before she signs it. Wisdom, it turns out, is mostly just refusing to be too proud or too tired to ask the question. And then came the part nobody warns you about. The 5 months of silence, the missed birthday, the laundry room crying. That stretch is where most people cave and call it forgiveness, when really it's just exhaustion. I didn't cave. I bought the red coat. I joined the walking group. I let Frank tell me my barn looked like a sad accident. I stood at the rim of that canyon and told Earl we'd made it. holding my ground long enough for the dust to settle. That was the grit. And grit is the only thing that ever turns a confrontation into a real life. So if you take one thing from an old woman talking to her own reflection in a dark window, love your people without losing yourself in them. Be decent, be clear-eyed, and be stubborn about the small pile of freedom you spent a lifetime building. Keep their photos on your wall and your name on the door. That's not coldness. That's the warmest thing you'll ever do for both of you.